All right, so welcome back to the third part of this module. And in this module, in this section, I should say, we're going to talk about building a Q&A or question and answer solution. And this is a very useful technology. And in here, we'll look at what the capabilities are from an Azure AI language model perspective for Q&A. We'll talk about the differences between question answering and conversational language understanding. We'll talk about creating a knowledge base, and then what if a question has a follow-up question? So we call those multi-turn conversations. So we'll talk about how to deploy that, as well as testing it to make sure it works properly. How do we point it to an existing knowledge base? And then finally, we'll look at interactive or active learning. So those are the things that we're going to look at in this section of our course. So let's talk a little bit about the benefit and the use case of question and answering. Most of you have probably been to websites before where a little chat box will pop up on the bottom corner somewhere or somewhere within the screen there on the website. And it'll ask you things like, how may I help you? And there's a free form text box where you can go in and type questions or comments and so forth. And you may ask a question like, what are your current sales this week? And you'll see behind the scenes it's processing, and it'll come back and list those sales. So in that scenario, what's happening behind the scenes is there's some type of question and answer process. Now, typically, the question and answer solution isn't used as a standalone product. It's normally included with, we normally design it with chatbots, which we'll talk about later on in our section here. But Q&A is the underlying component, the core component that you need to get this started. Now, with question and answering, what we have is a knowledge base of questions and answer pairs with a natural language understanding. This is going to be published as a REST endpoint that you can now have your applications consume. You can point your applications to the endpoint, perform a request, and then the model will respond back to you. And as well as with all of our other services, there are many different SDKs out there that you can utilize. Now, you may be wondering, what is the difference between question and answering and language understanding? And there are some differences between them. So first of all, with question and answering, the user submits a question expecting an answer, kind of like when you've gone to websites and there's a little chat box and you ask a question. The service uses a layered ranking approach. So based on the type of question you're asking, will determine what the best answer is. Question and answering is useful if you always have static answers to known questions, a very common questions. So if this is going to be a customer-facing thing or something internal-facing, what are the types of questions? So let's say I'm an airline company. I've got an airline website, and when people go to my website, I want a box to pop up, a chat box, and I want them to be able to ask questions. Well, if you're in the airline industry, some very common questions a customer may ask you would be things like, what time does my flight leave? Are there any delays? Are there any, what are your sales on current, trips? Are there any discounts for certain flights? Other questions, what's the maximum amount of luggage I can bring? What's the weight limit for luggage? What's the cost for additional luggage? And so forth. So these are very common or known questions that you can use question and answering for. And then once the customer, the user submits the request, the application will present the answer. So there's got to be some sort of front end that you're going to use for the answer. Now, that's question answering. It's very static. It's going to be very common questions that you get. With language understanding, the user submits an utterance expecting a response or an action. Do this or give me that. The service uses natural language understanding to interpret the utterance, match it to an intent, and identifies entities, which we'll demonstrate that as part of our lab exercise. The response indicates that the most likely intent and referenced entities. So what does this actually mean? Well, with question and answer, it's very static, very straightforward. With language understanding, the model will try to determine what is it the user wants. And based off of what the model determines the user wants, it will then provide some type of response. And just like with our question and answering, the client application is responsible for performing appropriate actions based on the detected intent by the language understanding. So Q&A is very static, whereas language understanding is not. So that's the big differences between those. Now, in order to do this, the first thing you'll need to do, and we'll demonstrate this in our demo a little bit later here, is we need to create a knowledge base. Because with the question and answer service, going back to my airline example here, if I need to know, what time a flight leaves or what is the baggage policy for the airline, the system has to find that from somewhere. So you're either going to create a brand new knowledge base from scratch, or you're going to point it to an existing one. But in any case, there must be some type of knowledge base associated with it on the back end. And to do this, which we'll do in our demo, you're going to go to the Azure AI Language Service. You're going to create an instance, a resource in your Azure environment. Once you've done that, you're going to go to the Language Studio portal. And from there, you're going to create a custom question and answering project. And in that project, what are you going to do? Well, as I mentioned before, for Q&A, it's got to be able to go back and find the answer to a question that someone may have. So there needs to be some type of knowledge base. In this case here, a frequently asked question web page. So let's say I'm an airline and I've got an FAQ page. I can actually point my Q&A service to that FAQ page, analyze it, index it, and then provide answers from that page. So it's very useful whether you're creating something new or you have existing FAQ pages. Most organizations already have an FAQ page, so this makes it very easy. You can also upload files, documents. So instead of a web page, you can upload documentation. And now a user can, when they ask a question, it can query the documents to find the answer. And you can add what we call chit-chat pairs, which we'll talk about what that is a little bit later here. So you create the knowledge base and edit the question and the answer pairs. So this is the process that you're going to use, which you'll see in your demonstration. Now, in some cases, first of all, it's very important that you understand the types of questions that your users are going to ask. This is going to be very important. Let me give you an example here. If I'm a hotel, let's pick a hotel, let's pick the Marriott Hotel. And I go to Marriott's website, and there's a chat box that pops up, a Q&A box. And I go in and I say, do you have any hotels in New York City? What will happen is the system will either go to an FAQ page or documentation that has a list of all the hotels globally, and it will respond and say, yes, we have hotels in New York City. And it may even provide a listing of some of the top, popular hotels. Now, typically in that scenario, the user doesn't just ask one question. There are normally follow-up questions like, okay, the first question may be, do you have hotels in New York City? The model will analyze it, come back, provide a response, say yes, here's a listing of the hotels in New York City. Now, typically what happens is the next question would be, is there any availability for these dates? So if you've noticed here, we asked one question, we received a response, and then we asked a follow-up question. In Azure AI, we call that a multi-turn conversation, where we have one question, we get a response, which leads to another question that gives us a response, which may lead to other questions. And you've got to be able to configure that as part of your Q&A model, which we'll demonstrate in our lab environment. So it's very important that you understand the business and the types of questions that your users will ask. Let me give you another example. There may be instances where it's only one question. Let's say it's an internal HR chatbot for your internal organization. You may get a question like, what form do I complete for PTO, for paid time off? And the model will analyze and come back and say, here's the form ID. So in those cases, you may just get one question. So it's very important that you understand the communication process between the user and the application. So in the example that you see here, here's a perfect example. How can I cancel a reservation? So the cancellation policy depends on the type of reservation. So now we're going to provide them two options. Is it a hotel cancellation or a flight cancellation? And then in this case here, the user would select a flight cancellation, and then it would specify the flight that they want to cancel. So this is an example, another example of a multi-turn type question that you may see. So once you've defined your question base and the knowledge base that's going to be used to provide the response, then you want to test it. So you want to test your model based on some sample questions that you may generate to see how accurate it is. And if it's accurate, then we can publish it. If it's not accurate, let's say it's not providing the responses that you want, then you can go back in there and retrain and retest the model, maybe include some additional data for it to consider until you finally get that testing process to the point where you feel like it's giving the best possible answers. And once that's done, then you're going to go in and you're going to publish what you've tested. Once it's published, what ends up happening behind the scenes when it's published, it creates an endpoint. And that endpoint can now be used by whatever applications you want to respond to questions and so forth. So let's take a look at an example of how this would work from a client app perspective. So in here, we're going to generate a request. And the question in this case would be, what do I need to do to cancel a reservation? So in this case here, we're looking for a request. So we look at our overall score threshold, and then it provides an answer for us. The answer in this case would be, okay, the response is call us at 555-123-4567 to cancel your reservation. Now, the model in this case generates a score. Think of the score, and we've seen this in other, if you watched other videos here, you've seen this also. This is a confidence rating. How confident is the model in its response? So in this, and this is typically going to be, think of it as a percentage. So it's 27% confident that it's accurate. Now, why is this important? Because here I define the score threshold, meaning that it will only respond if it can give an accuracy level or a confidence score in its response of at least 20% or higher. So because it came back with a 27 point, this number here response, 27.74 or 75, it generated a response and it provided the answer that you see here. Now, if you notice here in this example also, there's an additional question that can be asked. You know, how can I cancel the reservation? So what this is doing is it's showing me this is the question we have pre-configured, and that is the best match to the question that the user is asking. And we'll walk through how that works. So here's an example of how you can generate a request. Now, as mentioned before, there are ways that you can improve your performance. A lot of this deals with retraining, adding additional data, and so forth. You can also enable what's called active learning. And what active learning will do is it will learn what types of questions are being generated, and then it can recommend questions that you should include as part of your model. So when you do active learning, you can do implicit or explicit. Implicit, the service identifies potential phrases for a specific question. So think of it as rewording different phrases to ask the same type of question. And then you have the ability to accept or reject those suggestions from the model. With explicit active learning, the service returns multiple possible questions matching the user's question, and then you select the correct one. And then based off of that, the app will then use that to, submit feedback items to identify correct answers. So this is a great way to dynamically modify your questions as you go forward. Again, the goal here is to provide the best response to any type of question. So there's going to be some training periods that are going to occur. Keep in mind, the more data that you feed into the model for training, the better your answers are going to be, the better responses you're going to have. So that gives you an example of how to perform question and answering. So what we're going to do now is we're going to shift gears, and we're going to go in and I'm going to demonstrate how we can actually create a Q&A service, a solution. And part of that is we're going to create a knowledge base. I'm going to show you how to test, train and test, and then deploy it. So it exposes an endpoint, an API endpoint for you. So let's take a look at that now. Okay, so let's take a look at a lab environment here, and let's kind of demo the Q&A process here. So the first thing we need to do, we're going to go and we're going to open up the Azure portal. And we're going to log in with my demo account that we're using here. And our password. We're going to go ahead and sign in here. We'll save it for our lab environment. So one of the first things that you'll need to do is you need to create an AI resource. So we're going to go in, and there are a couple different ways that we can do this here. You can type in AI at the top here. I'm just going to go to Azure AI Services here, my little shortcut. And then within the Azure AI Services, we're going to go in. I'm going to create a brand new service. And the service we're going to create is a language service. So I'm going to select language service. And we're going to go ahead and create this. And I'm going to fill in this information here. So let's go ahead and create it. We're going to stay with the default settings. We already got a resource group here. Let's call this demo lang service 1. So that should be available because it must be a unique name. We're going to go with the free pricing tier. This is going to give you, basically performance differences. You have to agree to the AI responsible AI notice here. So we're going to agree to that. And we're going to keep all the network identity tags and everything else the same. So we're going to keep all of that the same. We're not going to mess with anything there for now. Okay, so it did validate, good. So we're going to go ahead and create the resource here. Okay, so our deployment is complete. So we're going to go to the resource here. And what we're going to need from here is going to be the endpoint and the keys, as well as the location here. So we have all the information that we need to continue on. This is the first step in the process. This is going to be essentially the endpoint that we're going to make our API call to. We're going to make a request to. The system, the model will then receive it, process it, and generate a response for us. So now that we've got our instance created, let's go ahead and open up another browser tab here. And we're going to go to the Azure AI Language Studio. So we're going to go in here. I'm going to go to language.cognitive.azure.com. And we're going to go ahead and sign into the portal here. Close this out. So because this is the first time I'm connecting to the portal and I have no resource connected, it's asking me to select an AI resource to link this portal page to. So we're going to go with my Active Directory environment, which auto-populates based on my credentials. The Azure subscription. So in this case, I'm going to only use a subscription that we selected. It's a language service, and there it is right there, demo lang service 1. So we're going to select that and continue on here. All right, so now we're in the language studio. So at this point, what we're going to do is we're going to hit the settings bar, and you can see that this is the default resource that we're going to use right here, demo lang service. So if you have multiple services or resources, then you can use just a toggle between them depending on what you want to do. And you can always create a brand new resource from scratch directly from here also. So that's the important thing there. So what we're going to do now is we're going to go back to the main page here, and we're going to create a brand, in this case here, we're going to create a custom answer, our question and answer solution. So we're going to select the first option. We can do conversational language understanding. We can do customized text classification, name entity recognition. But we're going to use the custom service here, and that's part of this. And if you notice the pop-up that I get here, it's asking me, you don't have an Azure Search resource linked to your resource. To create a custom question answer project, you need to add a resource. So what we're going to do here is we're going to select the option to create an Azure Search instance as part of this here. All right, so here we go. So we're going to create a brand new instance for search. And this is important because what will happen is our FAQ or documents, anything that we load into here, Azure Search is what's going to use to index and search it to provide the responses. Okay, so there we go. So we're ready to go as with our process here. So we've got our search resource built in here. So we're going to go back in now, and we're going to go in, and we're going to create a brand new question and answer solution. Now, notice here it's going to ask me a few questions. So we're going to, fill in the questions here. How do you want to select the language for the projects and the resource? I can pick the language every time I create it, or I can just say, hey, we're going to use a default language. And for our example here, we're going to use a default language, and our default language that we're going to use here is going to be English. So everything that we create, everything related to this project will be in English. If you want to do it very granularly, then you can select the first option, which is you want to select that language when you create a project. But all of our projects are going to be English. So we're going to select that. So for the project name, we'll call it Learn FAQ, Learn Frequently Asked Question. We'll go in and add a description to it here, FAQ for Microsoft Learn. And the default answer when no answer is found. So what do you want the response to be? So I'm going to go in and say, sorry, I don't understand the question. So if the model can't find an answer to a question, this is what it's going to come back with. So we're going to select next, and then we're going to create our project. So step one, we go into the Azure portal, and we create a resource, in this case, a language resource. Step two, we go into the language portal, language.cognitive.azure.com, and in here we create a project. So we have to log in, then create a project. So now here on the left, you'll see our project. So this is our project information here. In this case, the project is Learn FAQ. So that's what we're using for our project here. And on the left, this is where we're going to go and configure all of our settings. So the first thing that we need to do is we need to add a source. And this is going to be a data source that the model is going to use to be able to respond to questions. And in here, I'm going to add a URL. So we're going to go ahead and add a URL here. And the URL we're going to add is going to be the Microsoft Learn page. So we're going to use the Microsoft Learn site as an example here. And then we're going to specify the URL. So if I were to go and take this and go here, just to give you an example of what this would look like. So this is the Microsoft Learn Frequently Asked Question page. And there's, thousands of different things related in here that we can use, general profile, transcript, sandbox, and so forth. And this is what we're going to use to provide results or provide answers, if you will. So let's go ahead and select this here. We're going to cancel out of this here. Let's add the source and the URL. And we're going to auto detect it and let it figure out automatically what the structure is. All right, so now it's adding the source. So it's going to add the source in here in a second, which you'll see. Here we go. So now you can see that the source has been added here. So you'll see it's been done. There it is right there. So this is one of the sources that we're going to use. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to add an additional source. So the additional source that we're going to add is going to be something referred to as chit chat. Now, chit chat just defines when the model responds to a question, how do you want the response to be formatted? Do you want it to be very professional sounding, friendly, witty, caring? whatever it may be. So let's go ahead and do friendly. We're going to make it a friendly response. So we've got the location where the data is going to be residing for the responses. And then with the chit chat, we define how we're going to respond. So there we go. So now you'll see both of those listed here. So at this point, what we're going to do is we're going to go in and we're going to continue on. So what we're going to do now is we're going to go over to the left and we're going to edit our knowledge base. So we're going to go in here. If you get any prompts, just accept all the prompts. And now what we're going to do is we're going to go in and we're going to specify what's called question and answer pairs. Remember, there's going to be a question, and then based on the question, how do you want the model to respond? So what we're going to do is we're going to go over here on the left and we're going to add a new question and answer pair. So in here, the source we're going to use is the Microsoft Learn site. So one of our sources that we included. And then the question. So the question we're going to put in here is, what are Microsoft credentials? So this is the question that someone would ask, and the model would then go here and find the response and then generate a response based off of that. So in this case here, we're going to go in and provide an answer. Microsoft credentials enable you to validate and improve your skills with Microsoft technologies. So we're going to select this, and then we're going to click Done here. So now what we're going to do is we're going to go over here on the left, and we're going to find the question that we just asked here. So I'm going to go in here, I'm going to do a search. All right, so now what we're going to do is we're going to find the question and answer pair that we just created, which is what are Microsoft credentials? So we're going to select this one here, which you see here. And what we're going to do is we're going to, define some alternate questions. So we're going to go in here. We're going to say, okay, so one question is, what are Microsoft credentials? That could be one way of forming it. So we're going to go in and add an alternate question. And then the alternate question would be, how can I demonstrate my Microsoft technology skills? So that would be another example of an alternate question that we have in there. In some cases, it makes sense to enable the user to follow up on an answer by creating a multi-turn conversation. And this enables the user to iteratively refine the question to get the answer they need. So what we can do is we can go into our follow-up prompts and we can specify what we want. So what we're going to do here is in our follow-up prompt, we're going to add a follow-up prompt. And the text that we're going to show is learn about Microsoft credentials. And then what we're going to do is we're going to create a link to a new pair. So we're going to go in here, we're going to say, okay, here it is. So when a user asks a question about Microsoft credentials, there'll be an option to learn more about credentials. And if they select that, it'll take them here. So this is going to be our new linked pair that we have. And we're going to show it only in this flow. And so what this means is a context-only prompt cannot be queried directly, meaning you cannot query this directly. You've got to ask a question, and then it'll provide that follow-up prompt with this link in here. So we're going to go ahead and add that prompt. So now what we have is we have the original question, which is, what are Microsoft credentials? We've also included in here an alternate way of asking that question. Now, how can you demonstrate your Microsoft skills? And then based off of that, if someone asks either this question or the question up here, what are Microsoft credentials? It can also include a follow-up prompt where they can select and learn more about Microsoft skills, certifications, and so forth. So what we're going to do is we're going to save this. So we're going to select the save button here. We're going to save those changes. So now it's been saved. So notice here the changes have been saved as part of this. So now we need to test it. So right here, we've got this little, which gives us the ability to test our responses. So in here, we're going to say include short answer responses. And by the way, for any of this, you can always hover over the information button here, and it'll tell you to select the checkbox to enable short answers, or this one, deploy your project first to use this option. So now what we're going to do is we're going to go in here, we're going to type in a question. So we're going to say hello. And the prompt, our bot basically comes back and says, hi. So now I'm going to ask a follow-up question, or in this case, another question. What is Microsoft Learn? Which is the first question that we wanted. So you'll notice here the answer. We provide role and product focused documentation, hands-on training, and certifications to help you get your products. So then you can go in and select thanks. And just type that in, and there you go. So you can select that. So that's the first way. So now that I like the responses that I'm getting, I'm ready to deploy this. So in order to deploy this, what we're going to do is we're going to go in and we're going to select the option to deploy. So now what we're going to do is we're going to go select the option here, and we're going to deploy our knowledge base. And again, this is the Learn FAQ knowledge base that we're deploying. So we're going to select the option to deploy. We're going to deploy it. And now it's going to deploy this knowledge base. So now, here's what happened. Let's kind of, while this is deploying, let's kind of walk through what we did. Number one, we created the AI resource that we need, language resource. We then went to the language.cognitive.azure.com portal page, logged in, and we defined the sources that we want. So first we created a project, and then in that project we defined that we want it to be a friendly chit chat, and we defined where we want the data, the reference data to come from. So in this case, the Microsoft Learn site. We then went in and we said, okay, here are all the basic questions that were generated here. Some of these are from our chit chat. Some of these you would pre-configure. We then went in and modified. We added alternate questions to one of our questions, as well as follow-up prompts, which we did for our, the Microsoft certification question. Then we tested it out. We performed a test of it to make sure that we're getting the responses we want. And now let's make sure our model has been deployed. It has been deployed. So we went to deploy knowledge base, selected the option to deploy it, and we're ready to go. So now that we've deployed it, that means it's in production. As a developer, what you would do then is you would get your URL. So this is my prediction URL that I would use. Or if you want, here's a sample request for what you're using. Now that you have the prediction URL, now you're ready to use it. So now let's take a look at, now that we've got the model created, we've tested it, we've deployed it, how do we integrate this into one of our applications? So we're going to open up Visual Studio Code, so VS Code here. And we're going to do a little demonstration here. So we're going to pull from GitHub. So we're going to do a Git clone here. And we're going to pull a sample repository as part of this here. So we're going to pull this down. It's going to download. All right, so it's downloaded it. So we're going to go ahead and open it up. You'll see it pop up here on the left. There we go. So all of our, in my demonstration here, we're going to go in and we're going to select the option to configure an application. So the application we're going to be configuring here is kind of a demo Q&A app, and I'm going to be using C#. Again, if you want to use Python, if you're playing around with this, you're more than welcome to use Python. So what we're going to do now is we're going to go in, we're going to open up an integrated terminal, and we're going to add the packages that we need. So in this case here, the Azure AI language Q&A package. So we're going to do a .NET add package here. So now we're going to go ahead and add that package. So we're going to do a .NET add. We're going to install this package here, which is our question and answering. You can see here it's installing it for us. All right. So it installed the package for us. So now what we need to do, and this is pretty much the first thing you always want to do, is you want to go in and you need to specify your endpoints that you're going to be using. You need to define the namespaces that you're going to be using, the typical things that you would do here within your environment. So what we're going to do is we're going to go in and we're going to go to our program.cs file. And here's our code that we're using for this demo application. And we're going to modify. We're going to import some additional namespaces here. So we're going to go ahead and import those namespaces. There we go. And here it is right here. So we added the package. We're going to import it, the Azure AI language question answering. So that's the what we're going to import. So now in our main function here, which is down here, we're going to go in and we're going to make some code changes. And again, this is purely for demo purposes here. We have a demo application. So we're going to go to creating our client endpoint. So right here. So we're going to create a client using an endpoint and a key. So we're going to go in here and select that, put in the pertinent information that we need. I'm going to clean this up a little bit here. There we go. So this is going to generate the client. So what it's going to do, it's going to pull the endpoint as well as the key that you see here. And that's going to be defined in here, which we'll do here shortly. We'll define that information. So this is going to create the client that we're going to use to generate the request. Then what we're going to do is we're going to go in and we're going to go to the submit a question and display an answer part of our code here. We're going to add that code in here. Just clean it up a little bit here. There we go. So this is where we're going to generate the question that we need. And you'll see this down here in a few seconds here. So we're going to generate that. Now, let's go ahead and save this. Now, I want to show you guys something here. We're going to just to kind of give an example of errors and things that you may see. So I'm going to do a .NET run, and I'm going to run this and watch what happens here. So if you notice the error that I received here is an invalid URI, format URI cannot be determined. And that is because I never updated my app settings.json. So I need to put in the information for this. So let's take a look here. And there's a few things we're going to put in here. So number one, we're going to put our API endpoint for Azure AI. So we're going to put that in here. So that's the first thing. The second thing we need is I need one of my two keys, which we've talked about in previous videos here. So I'm going to go in here and put in one of the keys that we have. Now, if you notice here, the project name and deployment name, this is going to come from your language model that you've created here. So you need that information. So the project name is going to be Learn FAQ. And then the deployment name is called production, which is the deployment that we created here, which is our production one. And if you want to see what that is, you can actually go in here. If you select get prediction URL and you go in here, you'll see deployment name equals, and then in this case, it's production. So that's the deployment name that you need. So now that we've got our code fixed here, let's go ahead and save this. Let's rerun this. And now notice I get a question prompt. So in my question prompt, what we're going to do is we're going to go in there and ask a question. So the question we're going to ask is going to be, what is a learning path? So what's going to happen is the model is going to go through and it's going to provide a response for me. Now, the response it provided is based off of the FAQ documentation. So I use, let's go back to our sources here so you can see this. So we're using this URL. I'm going to click on this because I want to show you That's not going to let me copy. Hang on a second here. Got the URL written down, so I'll go ahead and dump it in here. So it's going to use this URL, which you see here, to answer the question. Why? Because in my project, I defined that that is one of the sources. So it's going to use that URL, which is the Microsoft Learn site. Now, how did it do that? If you remember, at the very beginning, I had to create a search instance. So I had to create a search instance. What happens is the search instance queries this page, this FAQ page, and essentially indexes the page. So that way it can be used, so it can respond to queries as needed here. So that's what's happening behind the scenes. Now, let's take this a step further. So let's go ahead and ask another question. Remember, one of the things that I asked, or I said, is if you don't know the answer, then generate a response saying, I'm sorry, I don't know the answer. So let's do that. But first of all, look at the response that we have. So here's the question. What is the learning path? The learning path is a collection of training modules that are organized around specific roles and so forth. The model came back and said, I am 100% confident in the response. Why? Because here's the source, and it will define where that source is. So let's try a different question. It should give me a response here. I'm sorry. If I can, let me put something random in here. There we go. So notice here, sorry, I don't understand the question, because I told the model that if it can't answer the question, to respond that way. So there you see, from a programmatic standpoint, where and this is very important, you have to create your client and then wrap that with the request. So this is our request, this is our question here, which is essentially this part of the code here. We submit the request, and when I type in a question, how old are you? I don't really have an age. So notice here, it generate the question, wrap the question in this wrapper for the client, send that request to this endpoint for billing purposes using this key, but this is the actual project that responded to it, the query. So that, hopefully you enjoyed that demonstration on creating a Q&A. We went from the very beginning on setting up the AI resource to building the language project, the Q&A project, all the way to, from a programmatic standpoint, testing it with an application. Stay tuned for more videos and more demonstrations, and hopefully you enjoyed this. Thank you.